There are a number of teams, Michael, that you have identified as potential Super Bowl winners in 2023. And before we get straight to your list, there is an article out right now at VSiN.com you put together kind of breaking all of these down. But how many teams realistically do you feel could win a Super Bowl based on what you've seen through this 5-week sample?
Well, that's the genesis of the column, right? I kind of sat there and thought, okay, who's really eliminated? Who do we think doesn't really have a chance? Like there's teams that are competing for playoffs, but what team has the makings of a Super Bowl contender? And I went through it, and I think I came up with 5. My whole premise of the column too was I think we've overrated the AFC. I know I have. I don't know about anybody else, but I have. I thought there were a lot of really good teams in the AFC, but I think there are just a lot of good teams, strike really. I think they're good teams. Like, I think Baltimore's a good team. Do I think they have the makings of a Super Bowl team? I don't think so. They're going to have to do a couple things to fix their team. Same thing with Jacksonville. Obviously, Pittsburgh. Buffalo, the 2 injuries, I would have said they're the class of the AFC, but those injuries make me worry. And then Kansas City. I mean, nobody talks about Kansas City offensively, how much they have struggled.
Well, yeah, and uncharacteristically seeing their quarterback in the reigning MVP and Patrick Mahomes with some unacceptable, in most of our opinions, interceptions, the way that the ball is just floated into the other team's hands in a number of instances. But okay, so let's get to the top 5 that you have. And I like this because it's so different from what we do every week when we do Lombardi's list and we talk about your top 5 and bottom 5 power rated teams in the NFL, because those are based exclusively on numbers and exclusively on the set of statistics and analysis that you have together. This is that mixed with the eye test and what you're feeling and your opinion. So obviously, we have the San Francisco 49ers on there, who have been the class of the NFL to this point, one of just 2 undefeated teams, along with the Eagles, who are also undefeated, the Lions, the Buffalo Bills, and the Kansas City Chiefs. So despite the Chiefs' issues, you still view them as a team that can win a Super Bowl.
Because they're the champion. And, they have this ability to win games that you don't think they should win. Last week was a perfect example. They won the Jacksonville game 17-9. Look, this defense is elite. This is the best defense they've had since Andy Reid's been there. With Chris Jones inside, they can cover Spagnuolo's scheme. I think there's 5. I would argue there's, I don't see anybody else. Who else from the AFC? Let me hear your take. Who else from the AFC would you put in there right now after 5 weeks saying, okay, that team has the makings of a Super Bowl team?
So
Am I missing somebody?
I know we talked about it a lot already on the show about the defensive issues for the Miami Dolphins, but I think because of what they do and the power and the speed and the output that they do offensively, it's hard not to include them in that conversation in the AFC. And also, Michael, another team I just want to get your 2 cents on, because I know it's a tricky subject based on what we have physically seen with our own eyes to this point. But would it be foolish to ignore the Cincinnati Bengals, given what we've seen the last couple times that they have started slow and then they end up making a run late in the season, AFC Championship appearances? I know it has not looked good, but Joe Burrow taking steps in the positive direction from a health standpoint, would we be foolish to not think of them as a team that could be there at the end of the year?
I asked myself that question this morning, and the conclusion I came to was I don't think they're as good as they need to be on defense. Like, even that game was hard for as well as they played offensively, it was hard for them to put that game away. It was really hard to put that game away. And I was on Cincinnati in the game, and I thought once they got up 10-0, they were down 14-10. And Burrow played like we're used to Burrow playing, not to the level, but much better than we've seen them. I just don't know if they're good enough on defense. See, for me, I start with defense to get to the Super Bowl. You're not going to the Super Bowl trying to outscore people. It just doesn't happen. We're going to see it this weekend. Wind, weather, it all plays a factor. You got to stop people. Maybe Miami can get better defensively. I have full faith in Vic Fangio's schemes. I know he's a really good coach. But right now, there's no evidence on statistical data that says they will.
Another team in your top 5 that I feel like I want to bring a little more attention to is the Detroit Lions, especially because we both, I think this preseason, talked about, is the hype train warranted? Is this a little bit too much? Yeah, they played well at the end of the season, but who is this team really? And I mean, everything that we have seen to this point, I would say, it's been really impressive. And even the one loss is to a Seattle team that I don't think anybody looks at and says they suck. So I've liked what I've seen from the Lions in just about every facet to this point, and the way that Jared Goff has kind of had a little career resurgence there in Detroit.
Yeah, and the one loss that they had was an overtime loss, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
they lose in overtime and didn't get the ball, and so they didn't even get the ball in overtime. I was always reluctant about their defense. But when I watch Benito Jones, I watch McNeil, I watch this Bugs kid play, and then you watch Harris and you watch Hutchinson, who's been outstanding. And I think the addition of Jack Campbell gives them more speed. Look, their secondary's not elite, but I do think Sutton's played really well for them, and they're improving in the back. But this front's tough to block. And they play in a dome, which that crowd noise helps. But this offense is really tough to stop. I mean, last week, they put 42 on the board, and they don't have Gibbs, and they don't have St. Brown. And because their line's so good, and Laporte, they've used him so well, I just think they're for real. I really think they're for real. And they play with a sense of toughness. As I wrote in the column, I was not a big believer in busting kneecaps. I thought it was too high schoolish. But I think there's more intellectual capacity to the Lions than obviously with Ben Johnson running it. I think Aaron Glenn's done a great job of fixing the defense, playing with physicality, and creating turnovers.
Yeah, Ben Johnson probably going to be in line for a head coaching job if this season keeps going as good as it has to this point.
So might Aaron Jones be Aaron Glenn, the way that they've improved defensively. I mean, he has really improved the defense. And they're doing it up front. Look, they get Benito Jones off the waiver wire. They get Bugs off the waiver wire. I mean, McNeil they draft in the 3rd round, but I mean, he's doing it with guys that were available to any other team.
An update on that Amon-Ra St. Brown injury. Dan Campbell said yesterday he's got a pretty good chance to play Week 6 against the Bucs. Quote, "It's certainly more than questionable. I think it's closer to probable at this point, but we'll see how this week goes." And I don't want you to laugh me out of the building, but speaking of the Bucs, they are the NFC South leaders right now. They're probably going to win the division, probably going to get a spot in the playoffs. Anything can happen in the playoffs. Do we need to talk about Tampa a little bit? Maybe.
I mean, look, we need to talk about them because when I ran my power rankings this week, they're strong. I mean, this morning very early, I'm like, no, are you kidding me? I mean, they're good. Their numbers are outstanding. And Mayfield has done a really good job of avoiding contact, getting out of trouble, making plays. He's thrown the ball more accurately this year than he ever did last year. I don't know if they can sustain this because the one thing that always bothers me, when they played a good team in Philly, they were not in that game.
Yep, something to keep an eye on, certainly. 3-1 straight up and ATS to this point, but Baker Mayfield, who we made all the jokes about being the successor to Tom Brady, has actually been pretty good. 3-1 start. Not too shabby for what we've seen. They do have to come out of the bye week, though, against this Lions team that has been very, very good, as we just referenced.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.